Welcome, everybody, to our episode of Incubator Weekly this week. We've got Andreas Rudd. Welcome, Andreas.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yep, appearing for the second time about this topic. First time we had a show with Joel, and you guys went into some details about your latest proposal for funding assistance for compliance with the MiCA regulations coming up for CrowdNode.
Mm-hmm.
We will go over that proposal in just a minute and discuss it. I'm going to try to keep the show. I know you've been traveling and you've got very little sleep, so we won't keep you for much longer than an hour. I think we'll probably try to keep it within an hour today, and we'll jump right into it. How's that sound?
Good. That sounds good, but I can't stay on longer. What was it? 2.5 hours. It ended up with Joel the other day, so that was a long one.
Yeah, we definitely won't go that long, and we will try to get it more condensed. I have several questions about the proposal. We will we'll start by I'll share my screen right now, and we will start by reading the proposal itself because it's very short. And then I have some questions about the proposal itself. And then I have some questions that were not addressed in the proposal, and we'll just kind of knock those out. And anybody watching, please feel free to ask your own questions. I did get one question from Tanta Stefana, so we'll ask that question as well. And yeah, do you? I guess you'll probably be doing most of the talking anyway. But do you want to go ahead and just? Can you see the screen that I'm sharing?
I see it.
Let me bump up the font a little bit.
Yay!
So this is a proposal for CrowdNode MiCA license getting started. The getting started scares me a little bit, but we'll talk about that in a minute. This is for 255 Dash, and it's for 2 months, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. The voting ends for this proposal in 3 days. So everybody, please go out and vote one way or another on this proposal and all the others. There are quite a few proposals this month. It's going to be an interesting close to this month.
Indeed.
I'll just scan through these real quick, just for posterity's sake, so that people can see what proposals we have on the docket this month. And then I guess I'll go ahead and show this view as well. This is the wonderful M&O Watch site, and it gives a little bit of a breakdown of how the voting is going right now. You can see 152 yes votes, 59 no votes. And interestingly enough, I just saw this morning, there is another proposal requesting the same amount of funds, 255 Dash, but this is going to Dash Core Group's funding address, but it is not written or I think even prompted by Dash Core Group. It's just, this is an anonymous proposal, as you can see with this gap here. Somebody's requesting this same amount of funding to go to DCG instead. So if it weren't hard enough to get funding in the DAO, it just got harder because now there's an alternative requesting the exact same funding.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that so far? Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw it. It's a cheeky move. I actually love it, but it really doesn't help us. And I think, as to the duration and the getting started and the amount that we ended up putting on the proposal. So back in Amsterdam at the ETH Dam, the estimate from a lawyer called Sadri Salih, which might be known to the community, might not, but he operates out of Amsterdam. I had a couple of chats with him, and his like raw estimate of just getting the help to do external stuff, and we'll get into some details, would be his assessment was 20 to 30,000 euros. For that, we obviously need to write the policies ourselves. We need to do a lot of work to prove compliance, but that's just for getting part of the lawyer fees covered, to get written statements that what we're doing is sufficient in terms of covering MiCA, and then obviously external auditors afterwards. And these guys, they know what to charge per hour, and it's really annoying. So what we're asking for here is more, basically symbolic, right? What I told Joel was sharing is caring. When I did the pre-proposal talk in Discord, I actually said that it was more likely to be 550 for 3 months to get to that amount, right? But I could see the list of proposals filling up, and some of the other proposals I actually think are really good, like funding Pandemic Day, Platform Explorer. I want that out there as well, operational. So I'm really biased myself, to be honest. But we are also facing MiCA, and let's get into some of those details afterwards. But I really needed to sort of have an opinion from the community as to CrowdNode or CrowdNode not, or what can we possibly do to maybe mitigate that that there is time is running out, but there are things that we could possibly do to ease off everything. You and I have talked about building on the APIs, and but let's get to touch all those points, I think, in the next couple of hours, hour and a half.
Okay, yeah, the first, I'll have more questions about the cost later. I did notice that you mentioned 30,000 euros just to get started. So this definitely isn't covering all of that. Even doubled is still less than half of that figure.
Sure.
But let's go ahead and read the proposal text. It's not long. I'll read it since you'll be talking most of the time after that. So you say, hey, MNOs, CrowdNode needs a MiCA license to be able to operate going forward after the end of 2024. This is cumbersome and costly license to get. MiCA is short for Markets and Crypto Assets and is required by any service provider that operates from EU or any provider that wants to serve a citizen or company within the EU. MiCA has an extraterritorial application of law comparable to the New York BIT license. Headlines of what needs to be done. So there are 4 items here. Documentation, detailed processes, procedures, risk assessments need to be written. Technical changes. Changes must be implemented to ensure risk minimal one address principle, often referred to as from others as an exchange type address that links to you. Lawyer, so written legal opinion on what CrowdNode has described in the documentation is good enough to be compliant, possibly also a legal opinion on Dash overall. Reports to prove that we are doing like written in our documentation, and external audits that objectively prove it. For many of you, I expect this is enough information. If you want more details, start by watching this video, the Dash podcast. That's the 2.5 hour podcast with Joel. There's also been good discussions asked on the pre-proposal channel in the Dash Discord. I could copy paste, but rather not engage in Discord. So that's the whole proposal right there. I have some follow-up questions on all of this. So that's yeah. I have some notes that I have that I'm not sharing on my screen because I get confused when I share my whole screen and I'm not sure what I'm sharing. But on the first part here, this first sentence, CrowdNode needs a MiCA license to be able to operate going forward. Can you expound on that a little bit? I guess the basic question is, if you don't get a MiCA license, what will happen? And furthermore, are there any hard and fast deadlines? I know that in my research for this, I saw December 2024 a lot, and I also saw June 2022 a lot. Can you tell us more about the deadlines of what needs to be done and by when?
Yeah, I can try at least. And I expect you to sort of keep track on the questions, right? If you ask too many questions in one sentence, I'm likely to forget some of them.
Sure.
No. All right, look, where to start here. So I'm an engineer by trade. I'm not a lawyer. I don't speak legalese, but I'm trying my best here. So MiCA had a sort of two-step implementation in terms of what goes live when, right? So there's a couple of classifications that you need to sort of pay attention to, and that's in terms of obviously we're considered a crypto asset service provider. That's called short for was it CASPs, right? Hello, a CASP, and that means that we're governed by the MiCA, and basically looking at us being a CASP running on Dash, we then also need to figure out how to classify Dash. And there's like three different categories. It's like an asset reference token, which is basically ART for short, right? Which is basically any token or referenced token assets. So that could be any combinatory assets that are sort of put in. Or another classification is the EMT, e-money token, which for a lot of practical purposes are different, but stable coins, as far as I understand, or maybe I'm mixing the two up. But nonetheless, Dash is in none of those two categories, as far as I can tell and see and interpret and understand, but in the more utility class, or what basically referenced as other asset type, right? So, but it's still there. It's still an element, and we need to comply with MiCA. But because we're in the utility, it's by December 30th of December 24 that the FSA is open for official applications. That is basically. So what does that mean? That means that if we want to, look good, be compliant, it's not only hitting that date that's relevant, but at least having a good start in terms of where to be at that point in time is relevant. But there is an 18-month sort of grace period. I think they call it the grandfather clause or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm actually not sure where they got it from, but that's like the time until, from December 30th, 24, where you, after 18 months following that date, you need to have your license in place. So they sort of leave a long period, 1.5 years of time to have the local financial super authorities to adapt and ask the right questions and sort of build their own interpretations of what needs to be done and how to do it, and also obviously for the companies that needs to comply to build and write the processes and provide documentation and get things on track in terms of what it requires.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the three categories. There's the e-money tokens, which I was saddened to find out doesn't refer to. It refers basically to stable coins, like I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think this is a sneaky move by the regulators to try to suggest that no kind of crypto tokens or crypto assets can be money unless they're pegged or tied or backed by a fiat currency. So that's the one classification. Then you have what was the second classification?
The asset reference token.
Asset reference tokens, and so from my understanding, that would be like a USDT that is backed by not just one single fiat currency, but a basket of currencies and maybe even non-currencies, assets like gold or treasuries, things like that. So those are asset referenced. And the other third category is utility tokens, which I've heard is Bitcoin is included in that. I would guess that Dash is included in that. Do you know, have you engaged with any lawyers yet to just clarify that Dash is or is not in that category, or is this just your estimation?
That's my estimation.
Okay. It would make sense.
That would be like one of the questions we would really want answered, right? Not only for CrowdNode's sake, but for all our sake in this community. So that would be an obvious one, not only just to get an opinionated answer on, but possibly even something in writing that we can use going forward.
Yep. Okay. My second question, then, moving on to, let's see. Let me bring us back here. From the proposal text, actually, let me bring back the proposal. So the documentation, has this been written at all? Are these all things, the documentation, the technical changes, the legal work, and the reports? Is this all stuff that needs to be done in the future, or has any of this stuff been done yet?
So, we've been around for 6-7 years. We have a lot of good processes in place. A lot is described in PowerPoints, and I'm fairly sure whatever I feel we have, it's not gonna be what the Danish FSA is looking for in the formats we have them today. So I'm pretty sure we need to write up something that's more detailed, more, word heavy than what's practically implemented, and also practically automated for a great part of our platform. What we don't have is sort of a detailed risk assessment and a risk method model, and that's particularly important for the element of AML. Need to do cook or not cook, right? So we really need to elaborate on that. That's one of the things that I've learned the past couple of months. That's probably the most important part of everything, to be honest.
Okay.
And that's because MiCA, if you try to search through the MiCA documents, there's practically no reference of KYC or AML, because that's governed by a totally different regulation set, right? So that's why it's also relevant to say, will MiCA change whether if we have to do AML, KYC of our customers or not? No, it doesn't change. It hasn't changed anything for the past 3 years. But the overall awareness level on who we are, CrowdNode, when we do then apply for a license, might call for some extra attention that needs us to be extra sharp on the risk assessments and indeed also coming to the technical things we might need to do as well.
Yeah, that actually hits on another one of those questions that I have. There is from what I've discovered, there are two major things going on in Europe with regards to regulation right now. There's MiCA, and my understanding of MiCA is that it's more of trying to get crypto asset businesses registered. Like you said, it's not dealing with KYC, but there's another separate piece of regulation that seems to be happening in parallel, although they're very separate. And this is regulation regarding the FATF. I'm trying to remember what this stands for.
Financial Action Task Force. So that's actually, I think, was a French initiative that's actually, decades old, well, at least 10 years old, right? But what they started to do was seen as trying to regulate a lot, and some of it basically went into what's today known as the AMLD, so the Directive for Anti-Money Laundering, and there's been I think it went into it in the 3rd or 4th edition of it, and we have the 6th edition that's sort of being rolled out or is in effect now, basically.
Yeah, and this is definitely something that is very KYC heavy, anti-money laundering, all the terrorist financing regulations, know your customer information required. So this is the one that's definitely scarier.
Absolutely, I'm more afraid of that one than MiCA, honestly.
Yeah. So my question regarding that is, it does seem to be that this is happening, even though this is like it's not a European Union regulation. It's like a multinational thing that is very extra. Yeah, it's something that's I guess you said was started by the French, but it's an international organization that basically is not spearheaded or officially official from any specific country. But it does seem like Europe is going to pass this thing. So if that does pass and these KYC regulations come into force, even though it doesn't have anything to do with MiCA, will CrowdNode be obligated to follow those rules? And if so, does it make sense to get a MiCA license if the intent is to try to remain KYC free? So a lot of questions kind of wrapped up in that. What's CrowdNode's commitment to not requiring KYC? And does it make sense to get the MiCA license if this seems inevitable that KYC will be required?
So good questions, multifaceted answer is obviously called for here. So the FAFT recommendations were actually incorporated in most European anti-money laundering laws back in 2005 already. So it's out there, Ryan. It's not if this is passed. Those are passed, right? And we opened a business in 2018, started building in 2017, and during 2018 we had a long. Basically, we waited for the Danish FSA to reply back to us whether if by their standards and their understanding of what we did, and I know we'll get into that exchange or single address principle, whether if there was an AML risk in what we did. And the reply we got was there doesn't seem to be a risk. So in other words, you cannot take custody of people's passport identities and all that, because that would another directive was the GDPR regulative, right? So the data protection sort of booted our option from doing it. But we launched with KYC, if you remember, or at least some in the community might remember that they had to spend time on doing that. But when we got that reply from the Danish FSA in 2018, we removed that because that was then by accident something we weren't allowed to keep. Minimum information standards would then apply. Lots has happened since 2018, but we haven't been dragged through the machinery, and there is a risk. Obviously, there is a risk that we will be to some extent forced into doing something else, and that else would be maybe KYC on custodial, or maybe evolve into a completely non-custodial business. So I don't see, as a European company, there's a choice of doing what I know, voluntary KYC for EU citizens only, stuff like that. But I strongly believe that with the right, very strict, blockchain, on-chain governance, that it's easy to justify, at least in my mind, that there is no AML risk. But whomever might sit across the desk from me in the Danish FSA might argue that they have a different view on it. So will we be forced potentially? Yes. Is it a risk? Yes. Do I believe that we will be able to successfully run CrowdNode without KYC afterwards because there is no risk? I also believe that, but that's sort of the paradox that we're navigating right now, and we won't know for sure unless we test it out and actually take the dialogue with the Danish FSA steps further. But we need to have our documentation in order before we do that.
Okay. Quick question on the cost of the proposal. What is the cost going towards? Is this going towards the 255 dash for 2 months? Is this going towards lawyers? Is there a specific fee that's required by to get the MiCA license? Is there any actual fee to get the MiCA license, or is it strictly lawyers, CrowdNode staff writing documentation?
Not even CrowdNode staff. So it's purely lawyers and auditors. So basically, what we need to have someone that's not us verify and vet. I'm not even sure that there will be a small fee for pushing the application towards the Danish FSA. I haven't heard that. Okay. There might be, but that's minor. No, so it's strictly the external costs that will incur by getting a lawyer to sort of look at the policies, look at the risk modeling, the risk governance, the compliance things we put in writing, and say if it's good enough or not good enough. I would love for them to also provide better versions if that's possible. But that's also likely to be more expensive, right? Mm-hmm. And then we need some good cryptocurrency auditors that are not affiliated with the lawyer either, that comes in and provides oversight into if we write that we're doing it in a certain way, and the lawyers attest that it's compliant, following MiCA standards, and then the verification also is taken care of by an auditor that we're actually doing like we're writing we're doing, right? So that's basically what we intend on using the funds for.
Yeah. So what does it mean to actually be compliant to MiCA?
Yeah.
Do we know that? Do we know what it means? First of all, let me ask: have you read the? I think it's like 300 or maybe even up to 1,000. I saw pages long. Yeah. Some versions. Have you read the actual MiCA license regulation?
I've read. There's. I think it's referred to as a distilled version of 170 some pages. I've read that one, and in all honesty, I didn't slow read it. I skimmed it, right? Because there's so much stuff I don't really understand, anyways. So for a lot of my knowledge, I'm obviously ChatGPTing, Googling, and asking friends, right?
Yeah,
but it's a beast to get it from A to Z. But it's also a wonderful beast because I see a lot of things that are not necessarily a bad thing for us as a small, non-significant player.
Yeah, I'm panning through some of the first pages just to give people that are watching the video version an idea of what this looks like.
Yeah,
I think that this is the actual document from what I could tell, and as you can see, it's many pages. Let me just skip down to the bottom. 380 pages, this version at least. I watched some videos related to this stuff. I want to read two statements that the researchers over at Coin Bureau picked up, and get your comments on those. Let me just bring up my notes. So first thing that was text taken out of this document, I believe, and I could probably do a find to see if it's actually comes up. But it says, where crypto asset services are, as defined in this regulation, are provided in a fully decentralized manner without any intermediary, they do not fall within the scope of this regulation. And that's interesting because it says where crypto asset services are defined in this regulation. So I would understand, my overall understanding of MiCA is that they are not trying to go after DeFi. They're explicitly not trying to regulate any kind of DeFi, meaning the fully automated smart contract based services. And they're not trying to regulate that. That's what this sentence might say, but it also says crypto asset services. So do you have anything, does that strike you as interesting or not?
Yeah, very much so, because what it actually says is to whatever extent something is fully decentralized and done in a trustless manner. And there's also other sentences like if it's done in a consensus mechanism of rewarding participants of a coin or an asset, then it's not in scope for MiCA. So it's actually a really important statement where we haven't seen anything anywhere in the world and that basically addresses that there is something that's known as decentralized finance when it's fully decentralized, trustless, not scope for MiCA. That's really interesting because that opens up for a lot of good possibilities. For Dash, it's you have to balance things because Dash is also considered a privacy coin. But again, MiCA and Dash, I'm not seeing any reason why we should, as a Dash community, fear MiCA at least. But it also tells me that if CrowdNode, if we build on top of the trustless solution we have now, which is, initially not a trustless solution, but if we truly build 100% non-custodial way to do what we're doing today, then, and only do that, by the way, then we're good. Then it's irrelevant for us to have a MiCA license.
Yes, which would mean you wouldn't have to get it. But the current state of CrowdNode is that it is a centralized with intermediaries service. So currently, you do need to get the license. I'm just wondering what would be required, and you and I have talked about this before. What kind of technical changes could CrowdNode make in order to fit within this this carve out so that you're not really required to do MiCA at all?
Yeah, so in all honesty, I can only see that we can achieve the completely non-trustless manner in the current setup, right? I've obviously CrowdNode as a company, I would love for CrowdNode eventually to make some money, but there's obviously an element to how to decentralize this. Ash had an idea on whether if we've put some thought into it, and it's been a topic going around the DAO for several years to build something that's basically Dash native, part of the ecosystem by default, and not something that's a needed service. So if the core team decides to build, what do I know, something Masternode shares, we would obviously look at something that is decentralized, and if we can also do it trustlessly, then we can be the matchmaking service of that and have the nodes ready. But as CrowdNode as a service, I think that we can only hit the hammer as a company on the trustless part, and we would need help to also achieve the decentralization aspects of it, right?
Now, the trustless side, is it possible technically to not have to receive any kind of funds, to not have CrowdNode have to receive any kind of funds for the trustless side? Because currently my understanding is that you do actually have to send in your funds to CrowdNode, even if you're doing trustless. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and we did this implementation because it's by far the simple implementation. There was a lot of theoretic deadlock risks that can be mitigated in a 100% non-custodial setup, but it's not going to be very user-friendly unless we have wallet integrations handling everything. So, Ryan, let's say you have 100 Dash and I have 900 Dash. Sending that into CrowdNode, there's 1,000. There we go. All we need to then worry about is the refund signatures. But if we keep them in our own wallets, while we're doing not only the signatures of actually ProTX funding a new masternode, subsequently the refunding, you've spent much more time on signing. And what if you spent your 100 Dash that's sitting there in the UTXO? Meanwhile, that would mean we have to restart everything. So building integrations into wallets that are able to then sort of lock funds, lock transactions, like we're seeing Core doing today when there's 1,000 or 4,000 in collateral, and helping to sign to sort of smoothen the user experience. That I think is needed. But yeah, there is a way. It's probably 2 to 3 times more complex than the setup we have today. But it's possible. It's doable. But I personally don't think it's doable without automations also on the wallet side of things. Few people would be able to do it. And yeah, looking at the adoption today of trustless, it's complex enough as it is, right?
Yeah, I fully agree that the only way to make it feasible would be to automate the whole process, the whole signing process. You'd have to have integrations with wallets.
Yeah,
that's something that to bring this into the incubator a little bit. We do have JavaScript versions of wallets that we have tried to make. We could make automated in that sense, but these are technical questions that would come further down the road, I think. And let me read this other statement real quick. So it says, in order to ensure a proportionate approach, no requirements of this regulation should apply to the offering of crypto assets other than asset reference tokens or e-money tokens that are offered for free, that are automatically created as a reward for the maintenance of the DLT or the validation of transactions in the context of a consensus mechanism.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say about this? My understanding of this is that, and this is actually a little bit of a revision from the version that I heard. They didn't have this exemption for crypto assets and crypto reference tokens, but Dash would be neither of those, I believe. But to me, this kind of says that it's not trying to regulate cryptocurrencies where the issuance is basically automatically done through the consensus mechanism for validating transactions. So that would probably be your typical proof of work that Dash technically is. What do you have to say about this? Does this help our case at all?
Yeah, I think it does. I think what you're looking at is a year old. They revised the statement a little bit, but the sounding is still the same. Maintenance of distributed ledgers or validation of transactions in a consensus mechanism thing is still there, and it's really relevant for Dash at least. But adding us as a service provider, we're distributing that reward. And that might actually make things a little bit more complex for us, but that's something we need to look at. But the good fellows from the Danish FSA pointed us to there's a concept of what's called alternative investment funds in Denmark, which basically calls for us to be listed if we fall under those categories. The regulatory requirements, the paradox here is they're not worse for an alternative investment fund, but you actually get a benefit of being listed, especially if you also prove compliance. But at least we're not in a bad place, because what we're seeing here from a Dash perspective is funds generated as rewards for a consensus mechanism. Although you're absolutely right to argue, is it proof of work? You could say instance sense are equally proof of service, right? And we're unique in that sense. So we probably need to educate what's the difference between proof of work, which is what the miners are doing on the Dash chain, minting new blocks, and the instance sense validations that the masternodes are doing. They still means to the same end goal, right? But it's different mechanisms that makes them tick. But for the sake of the argument, it would be simple to say that we are still somewhat of proof of work, and in that sense, in scope of this.
Okay.
But I don't think it changes anything for CrowdNode. I think we still need to have a license. I don't think we can add a service on top of a distribution happening on chain, and then Hail Mary, we don't need to do anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to go back to my screen share. I wanted to bring this up real quick. People can read through this. This was a while ago. This is just referencing two reports, the MiCA and the one that we discussed as well, which was the FATF's identity. Identity of those making crypto payments. So this is the KYC FATF version regulation, which I believe is this one right here. This is the one that would require KYC for all sorts of things, and I'm personally concerned about, because I personally don't think that most of CrowdNode's users are interested in doing KYC. I could be wrong. But I also wanted to play a short 1 or 2 minute clip of this guy talking about something similar and get your thoughts on this. So let's see, am I sharing my screen yet? Yeah. Okay.
I see it, at least. Can't hear him though.
Let me back him up a bit.
I'm not hearing anything.
Do you hear it?
Nope.
You don't hear it?
I don't hear it. I see him.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, I think that we'll skip that then. I was basically just going to, he was just going to talk about how these two different regulations are coming in at the same time, essentially. And my concern with that is just overarching concern is should we be trying to become a fully decentralized service? Should CrowdNode try to become a fully decentralized service, or should CrowdNode try to get this MiCA license? Because it seems like these are two paths that they part ways and they're mutually exclusive, and CrowdNode could choose one or the other. If CrowdNode's fully decentralized, then we don't need to get the MiCA license. It's essentially software. And if that's the case, then we don't need to do KYC. But if we do go with the MiCA approach, then, is it money wasted essentially if you end up going with MiCA, doing the MiCA regulation, and then also doing the decentralized version? Is that money wasted on the lawyers? I'd rather see that money going to CrowdNode engineers personally. To build the decentralized version.
So there's a lot of layers to it, honestly, and I follow you completely. I'm in tech. I'm an engineer. Should we spend money on what's non-tech, where it might seem as the project is not moving forward, dash CrowdNode et al., or will we eventually have a DAO that is strong enough? So that be the one extreme, or have a DAO that's strong enough to actually influence what's going on, or partake in good discussions and trying to be out there for what's essentially the purpose of MiCA. And the purpose of MiCA in EU is really about showing good conduct of operating a crypto business or operating a crypto or a token or whatever. It's there to basically protect the users. It's in place to prevent market abuse. That's all the at least political or ideological ideas behind MiCA itself. And I really cannot see myself against that in any way. And I'm not passing on any judgment to anyone in the community for being against that and feeling that that might be an overreach. But for what it's worth, it's actually really good. And MiCA is now, I've heard that on at least 2 occasions, being referenced as the future gold standard of how to operate crypto asset services. And that's because, again, MiCA is not AML KYC. MiCA is simply there to ensure.
MiCA isn't, but MiCA might be coupled with something.
Yes,
that's the concern.
Exactly, it might be coupled with it. But let me do. Last week I went to a conference here in Denmark called Tech Barbecue. So it's probably the startup conference in Copenhagen, possibly even in Scandinavia. And Chelsea Manning was there. And she had a good point that if there's no trust in that we can normalize these institutions, if we participate, and institutions basically meaning the Danish FSA, in this case for us at least, then we're really in a bad place in terms of a sort of democratic backslide. Paraphrasing what she said, right? And the Danish FSA, they're really approachable. We've written mails with them, we've talked with them on the phone, and they're not like, oh, it's like, okay, so we need to write policies, and here's a guideline for that, and you need this and that audited, and here's the guideline for that. So they're really forthcoming. They're not just saying that's never going to happen. They're really engaging in dialogue. And if what we're doing is just to show an even better good conduct than what CrowdNode is doing already, and I think we have a lot of good standards already. And if we can then also, share a good risk assessment and show a lot of good things, then I cannot see that money spent badly in any sense. And at least for one DFO or company using Dash and being so sort of in the community, I would love to be able to present a MiCA license, because that could pave the way for other companies to get a license as well. Then at least we know it's not Dash and it's not CrowdNode, because they have a license and it's on Dash. Then it's the concept of whatever other asset service providers would be doing with Dash, but at least it opens the gates towards different other services on Dash within EU. I think that can only be positive. But playing along with it, what if we don't get it? Will it then be money? That's hands down, that's a fair argument. It might be, except for what we would have done in terms of building an even better technical platform, having good policies, and like I also wrote in on the proposal. Then let's talk about the future for CrowdNode's code base and whatnot. But if we don't try, we never know if Dash and CrowdNode will ever fly within EU. And I think we have to try.
Okay, a couple things about that. So I'd like to get your idea, your most likely outcome. Let's just assume that this proposal does not pass. If we assume that as a given, what does the future look like for CrowdNode? Do you have to close up shop immediately on December 30th or December 31st or whatever the date was on 2024? Can you tell me more about that grace period? Would you have the grace period? Or do you have to completely shut down shop?
So the grandfather clause with the 18 months I love that for a couple of practical purposes, right? I don't see CrowdNode continue in its form after the 18 months without either being completely non-custodial, the trustless version 2.0.
Is that 18 months starting from December of 2024?
So essentially, we have to be in process on in dialogue, possibly even send an application, have some meetings, writing the different policies, and doing internal controls by that point in time. Not sit on our hands and pretend like nothing's happening. We have to start doing something. But obviously, we won't start on spending money on lawyers and external auditors because we wouldn't have the money for that. But we'll see how far we can then get by doing internal controls and then one interesting aspect with being on Joel's podcast or the Dash podcast the other day was talking about CrowdNode fees. We've sort of insisted on keeping them at 15%, which when we launched 6 years ago correlated with a Dash price of around $1,500. Right? But now we're down to 20-ish, right? And we're still at 15%. But we insisted on keeping it at that level, possibly because we're idiots. Can't argue against that. Disillusionated, possibly even also, but hoping for Dash to sort of bounce back on the charts, back in the top 50, right? And then I have a small hope that platform kicks off nicely. It builds traction for Dash. We maybe double our fees, and then maybe we can fund it within the 18 months of the grandfathering clause. But what if we can't, right? You tell me.
Yeah. Okay. One other thing that I saw that you had said to either Pasta or somebody else that was commenting on the proposal, and let me just go back to the proposal and scroll through the comment section as well so that people can see that. Is it the case that I think that you've mentioned, and I don't know where exactly, but you basically said if we don't get the MiCA license, then it's essentially shutting Europeans out of the Dash market. I did also see something that was related to that idea in my research, and it had to do with again, my audio is not connected, so I can't play the video, but I'll probably put it in the show notes. It has to do with this so-called reverse solicitation exemption. And my understanding of what that was is that even if a company, let's say outside of Europe, you can't operate a company in Europe without a MiCA license, a crypto company, like flat out, right? But if somebody else operated CrowdNode or you operated it from a different country, I don't know if that's possible, incorporated in a different country, even outside of Europe, my understanding is that people can still take, Europeans can still take advantage of any service that is provided by somebody that's outside of the country through this clause, through this reverse solicitation exemption, which basically means, if let's say a U.S. company has a service like CrowdNode, and they're not soliciting EU members for their clients, but EU members still could take advantage of that service as long as they're not solicited. So they basically have to say, hey, I want this service. And do you know anything about this exemption?
Yeah, so I think it's highly speculative, and it's going to be very hard to prove that you're really not marketing in any sort of direction towards EU for the sake of the thought experiment that someone would operate a service that resembles CrowdNode from the US, right? Proving that is, in reality, I don't think that will be possible. For CrowdNode's sake, well, we're a registered trademark in EU, right? We can't do that, right? It's too late. And for
you can't re-register from a different country.
No, we wouldn't be able to do that with the same IP and then pretend that we're not.
Also, I don't know how these legal things work. I just know that there's a lot of American companies that operate out of Ireland, for example, and they get all sorts of benefits for that. So I'm more of a tech guy than.
And you could argue, why not just move the company to Malta or Switzerland and see if we can get something going there ahead of time. And again, I feel that's either a dog and cover idea, or it doesn't seem right. I'm a Danish guy. I live in Denmark. I have a Danish company. The Danish FSA seems to be good to talk with, guiding us and not giving us any form of signals that this is the end, right? But they do have some requirements towards us. And by the way, even this reverse solicitation, that's even more unknown land than I think the entire MiCA aspect is. At least a couple of FSAs in every member state have an idea on how to proceed with these applications and stuff like that, and then actually seeing the application of the regulatory implementations afterwards is referred to as terra incognito, right? So it's very speculative for the reverse solicitation to ever have a real effect. I think you'll see any serious provider wanting to try to comply. To be honest.
And my questions probably come across a little bit as like anti-CrowdNode. I hope it doesn't come across that way. I've loved the service. I love the fact that wallets can integrate with the CrowdNode API. We've done that in the Incubator. We have a JavaScript library that integrates and implements the on-chain transaction API that you've created. I think it's a good service. You saw my comments. We've talked about it. I just don't support sending a bunch of money to lawyers. I'd rather see that money going to CrowdNode specifically to build a fully decentralized service. That's my personal preference, but I also want you to make your best case. And so some of the things that I've said have been like, can we figure out a way to, get around this, basically, is what I'm saying. And I'm trying to see if European members can still be served through this reverse solicitation exemption, for example, even if CrowdNode went away. So I'm just saying those things to see what stones have we not unturned, and is there any way that we can get around this? Because my personal major concern is that this proposal that we have, it's for 255 dash for 2 months, but that's just the beginning. It seems like that's less than half of what's going to be needed to even do what you already know will be required. What's your overall, can you summarize again what you think the costs going forward would be? And what would we get out of this proposal proposal specifically, just these two payments?
So I would definitely just try to highlight a very simple piece of math. If a lawyer costs 700 euros per hour, a good crypto lawyer to assess this, and we go for 30,000, that's shy of 50 hours of a lawyer's time. And if, let's say that a lawyer can maybe only need a lawyer 20 hours, and then the rest would be 30, possibly an auditor is a bit less expensive. That's maybe 40 hours of auditing by a recognized crypto auditing company from within EU. That's not a lot of hours to get externals on board to help with that. And that's for the 30,000 euro price tag, right? So, but So
did you say 700 euros per hour?
Yeah,
that's the going rate for lawyers right now for this kind of stuff.
Yes.
Wouldn't you like to have that instead? Don't we want to pay CrowdNode that instead? I mean,
that's a fun question.
That gets us 40 hours, right? $30,000 at 700 euros per hour. I mean, that's 40 hours of somebody's work. Does that get us much?
Yeah, but Ryan, your question actually had it tickled me twice, right? The best approach, I think, is not to sort of avoid the problem here, but work through it. So that's one part. And doing the compliance and governance stuff and having that external expenditure on whatever we need. That's one side of things. I still think it's relevant that we look at building the 100% non-custodial solution on top of what we have today, as a parallel thing to compliance and all that help to write things in legalese we need, right? So I don't see it as either or. I see it as something we, both, right? And I also still firmly believe there is a good and fair probability that we will be allowed not to operate without a MiCA license, but to operate without doing KYC. And only looking at the one address, as a member on CrowdNode, you always deposit from one address, and that's the same address the funds go back onto. And the only difference of what you deposited to what you get back is the distributed rewards. And that is something we can prove, and an external auditor will be able to prove. How's that more risky than just signing over your private keys to someone else in terms of AML, right? So I think it's a fair argument that I really need to try, and I can only speculate as to why exchanges are not taking this approach either. But now they're looking at instead of one address principle, like I call it, they're looking at having to prove ownership of an address for a user. So you can deposit from one address, but you then need to prove you own the address you wish to withdraw to. Why is that not just the same address? That's inarguably then an implicit proof to me that it's the same person. And nobody's making that case except us. And I think we have to make that case. And in terms of, if we then tighten the grip a little bit around this one address principle, and also, tell our members that when you have an address with CrowdNode, don't use this address to pay for, basically do anything else. This address is only used for you to send funds into, then to CrowdNode, then back, and then move elsewhere again. Then within our grasp of at least one or two transactions chain span, there's not going to be anything for us to see, report on, or I can't really find the good argument for not getting that. But obviously, I might be disillusioned here, and someone presents a good argument that's something not in the lines of government overreach, but actually explaining to me why that can be seen as a risk, because I can't see it. So I would want to build on the trustless, and I would want to build on further reducing risk on this, based on this one address principle that we've had right from the get-go, that I think still rocks in terms of the transparency it provides. But yeah, there's been a lot of good comments on the proposal side, right?
Yeah. Okay. I want to mention a question for you to answer from Tanta Stefana. I will post it here. Let's see if I can show it on the screen. I understand MiCA is for European countries, but how does this affect people in other parts of the world who may want to use your services, and how is it different from the services you currently provide? And then she also says, that didn't come through at the text, she also says, what extra KYC requirements do you have you required in the past? So I think you covered that. But do you want to say anything more about it?
I think the palette of services will be the same for all of our members, regardless of where you live in the world, basically. I don't think that they're sort of going to be, we offer something to people who live in the US and something to people who live in China and something to people who live elsewhere. The only thing that sort of governs our services from that perspective is sanctions, right? So those we need to be aware of and make sure we follow. And how can we follow sanctions if we're not, at least registering where people are coming from country-wise? So that's a paradoxical thing. And what extra KYC do we then need to require? Hopefully none, because there will be found a zero risk. But that there is a risk that, at least for the custodial part of what we're doing, we will have to re-implement or reactivate the KYC part. But there's a chance that we won't have to. But then again,
that depends mostly on the Financial Action Task Force regulations, not MiCA.
Yep. Exactly. But what if we build the 100% non-custodial and make that blockchain API wise easy, or at least possible for let's say you guys, the incubators, to build a easy wallet integration on. Then it's never in our custody. And one of the requirements related to all of this, both AML, KYC, one of the articles that activates that you need to be compliant is that it's custodial. So if we can remove the custodial aspect, we'll be in a much better place. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. So that's how it will be different. Just to touch on Tante Stefana's question, if we then start to build, and I think I showed a roadmap on Joel's on the Dash podcast, right? That I think we should have that Q1 next year, if not even sooner. Okay. But that requires you to maybe chip in and say you want to build the other end of it, or the mobile team, or Electrum, or Pasta into Core even.
Quick question on, do you actually do the hosting and operating of the nodes in CrowdNode, or do you outsource that?
We outsource that. So we have SIT and all nodes.
Okay. One Time has a question. He says, how many months of 255 Dash funding will be needed for MiCA ever in the future?
Ever in the future? That's a good question.
I think he just means like, how much more funding beyond this 255, 2 payments of 255? We've talked about it a little bit. I don't think it's known, but I'm just asking the question so that you can answer however you'd like.
Yeah. So I'm leaning very much on what Sadri told me in Amsterdam, and that doesn't mean that I'm not looking at other options or cheaper options. Doesn't mean that we will not try to save money, I'm basically looking for the MVP here, the minimal viable product, the minimal viable way to get to the point we need, and that's getting a MiCA license. For all practical purposes, maybe these 2 months will be enough to get us over the threshold, at least of showing that we're in process. If with the raised fees and fingers crossed Dash price increasing again, then we won't ask for another dime. Why should we? If we're showing profits, why would we ask for more? Right? It's basically because we don't have any money, don't have any funds, no wiggle room, but we want to get started on it.
Right. Okay. One Time has another question. He says, would CrowdNode ever...
another question? Then he's Two Time, right?
Yeah. Would CrowdNode ever confiscate users' funds if they don't do KYC?
I foresee that if we don't manage to get a MiCA license, we'll be damn sure to eject everything before the end of the grandfathering period of 18 months. No.
Okay, so if in the worst case scenario, the Financial Action Task Force comes out with regulations that say tomorrow you need to perform know your customer requirements on all of your customers, and you will not give them, you may not give them the funds back until they do KYC. What does CrowdNode do in this case?
I'm no hero. If they threaten me with jail time, I will have to abide by their silly rules, which is also, I think, why everyone should be pestering all chats with go trustless, because then it's basically just broadcasting the refund transaction. You have your funds back, right? I don't foresee a situation where the Danish FSA is gonna, do that.
I don't either, but
it's fine to hypothesize on it, and I'm not gonna look at jail time or a fine of I don't know how many years of my life it will take to not recover, right? So we won't, but go trustless, right?
Okay, and speaking of trustless, One Time has one more question, so he's now 3 times. He says, would it take years to make CrowdNode totally non-custodial? How long would it take? Estimate.
A couple of months.
A couple of months.
But again, that's providing the API, the mechanisms, the process. What does it, but and then someone needs to implement the other side of things, the wallet side.
Right.
And what
because it's not going to fly if it's not fully automated. If users have to manually do signatures and stuff like that, when I don't think that you'd get much adoption.
Exactly. Yeah, and my point is really we have with the API, it's also possible to completely, as an API user, with all the anonymity, privacy that comes with that, to vote. But I haven't seen any wallets implement the voting capabilities we have on our platform. It's been sitting there for over 2 years, right? So my fear is that we're building even more on some of the excellent capabilities that CrowdNode as a service has, and even better in the future, right? And nobody picks it up in the other end. I think you did really well, and I actually enjoyed. I think I've seen 2 presentations on the implementation of utilizing the API from your end, right, facilitated by you, and picking up on a capability to build voting in a Incubator wallet or the mobile wallet would be amazing. But also picking up on when we then do an API for trustless, which would be a different API than what we need for 100% non-custodial. But I think both would be doable within a couple of months. Q1 was what I put on the roadmap, at least for the technical deliveries to be done on CrowdNode's end.
Okay. Well, with that, I think that's all the questions that I had. Let me just double check. I've asked most of my questions. I think everybody else has asked their questions. I did have one question that I didn't ask that's related to CoinJoins. It's a bit of a, I don't know if you can answer the question because we don't yet know what kind of KYC regulations the Financial Action Task Force will come up with.
Yeah.
But if they do, my assumption is that they will not, if they require KYC, then it doesn't matter that you have coin joined funds. But if they don't require KYC, how do you deal with coin joined funds? Is it okay? Maybe you could speak to that just real briefly. Would you allow coin joined funds to transfer into CrowdNode, the single CrowdNode address? And do you have anything to say about that without knowing what kind of regulations might be in the future?
Yeah, sure. Also, I think let me draw a reference. I heard, and I'm not going to mention them by name, but some of the larger wallet apps out there that are basically building self-custody wallets. They have spent a lot of time and money looking at, will they be required to do KYC when they're even just providing, a self-custody wallet software? And the speculative answer was no, doesn't make sense. But what if? And the idea would then be that if you use this sort of one address principle that's then in their case referred to as a exchange address. So an address that an exchange has verified ownership for. So you provided, what do I know, the full KYC charade to Kraken, and they know that that's your address. Then the wallet provider could piggyback on that being a known address and then not do KYC. Right. So if we take that and extend that a little bit, then I don't see why we shouldn't be able to sort of do apply the same principles. But back to the complete mixed funds into a CrowdNode address and then onto the platform. It's not the same, but it can correlate a little bit, I suppose. And for all practical purposes, I don't see why we wouldn't allow it, because it's still the one address that is verifiable where the funds are coming from and going back to.
Right. Okay. Anything else that you want to say before we wrap up? Again, there's 3 days left to vote for this proposal. Yeah.
Thanks for a lot of tough questions. Yeah. No, I just saw that one time put in another question. Would we consider asking for funds to build the non-custodial part? And it's an interesting question, because I think I laid out that the money we're asking for is not for us to get paid, right? And I intend to continue spending my free time on CrowdNode. It's a hobby. I love the project. I think Dash is a very interesting project as well, especially these days with platform. Would I mind getting paid? Not at all. But this proposal is basically just covering external costs.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something else entirely. And I do see this can benefit, the community as a whole. If we write policies, if we get contextually write something that makes sense for CrowdNode, but at least some of what we write up and get lawyers to sign off on and get auditors to validate, I'll be happy to share with any DFO. So I
know Joel is interested in that aspect of it, because he has the hard job of trying to get Dash into as many venues as possible here in the United States. So this these funds could be used and reused in other contexts as well. If so, even though I don't personally support this proposal, I do want that to be made known that getting this MiCA license could have benefits, not just for you in CrowdNode, but also for Joel and what he's doing, and maybe even DCG. So I just wanted to throw that out as well. But I also wanted to say that I kind of wish that CrowdNode had and did and maybe even in the future would ask for funds for you personally to be paid, because that is the way that we can best retain our sovereignty in a certain sense of the term. Like I go on Twitter as Ryan Sovereign for a reason. I think that everybody deserves their personal sovereignty, and not that sovereignty should not lay in nation states. It's not nation states that should be sovereign. It should be individuals. And in terms of Dash, I think that the best way that we can remain sovereign as a project, as the Dash project itself, is that we pay our own people to build open source tooling, and we don't get captured by other sources of funding. Because I know that you guys haven't received any venture funding. At least I don't think. You're doing this out of the goodness of your own hearts, and so that's another way.
We did sell 12% equity to Diff and got funding a couple of years back, right?
That's an internal funding still, though.
Yeah. So no VCs.
I just see so many projects in the crypto space. They get captured by this outside funding, and I don't want to see that happen with any of our projects. No. So far, we've been good with not letting that happen because we pay our own developers. But I'm aware of the financial issue. You're obviously a for-profit company, so you hopefully want to make money at some point in the future. But right now, you're essentially operating as a nonprofit, because the cost of outsourcing the node operation probably is more than the revenue that you're getting from the 15% share, right?
Yeah. And for those that want some detailed calculations, insights, they can watch the 2.5-hour Dash podcast, right? Right. To me, this is, work through the problem, get in dialogue with the people, the regulators, the Danish FSA, possibly get a license, possibly at least get a lot more clever on what's up and down, what's possible and what's not. And all this as opposed to duck and cover, not try to get a hold of the opinions of those regulating us, having the oversight, with an extreme risk. I know it's way out there, of Dash developers being the next Tornado Cash guys, right? I'd rather engage in dialogue and make sure that it's, unless you work, with a pseudonym in front of you, right? It should still be safe to be whomever in DCG that's on the payroll there, to work officially for the project and not live in fear of regulatory overreach, right? And I see that extreme scares me much more than not getting a license. But we have to take the dialogue, and we have to take a fight, take a stance, work through the problem. I'm repeating myself, I know, but I really think this is imperative, and not do this. There's other projects that can fly below the radar, and if you want to stay more dark, you can do so. And again, I totally agree with the sovereignty that you're bringing forward, but that's again not the same as hiding and not talking with regulators and not engaging. I think those two coexist fine, but hiding and not trying to engage in dialogue and not trying to push and persuade, that's going to be a more certain end for a wonderful community such as Dash, I fear, out in this end of the scale, right? So let's take the fight. Let's try it out. That's all I'm motivating for. But we need a bit of help. I don't speak legalese. I need someone to write at least a valid statement on what we have is good enough, or help us to improve on it. At least we're going to get smarter on everything in terms of what it takes and what it doesn't take, and maybe CrowdNode's future is only non-custodial and trustless.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time. I kept you a little bit longer. You mentioned 90 minutes, so I
kept myself longer.
So I think, yeah, I appreciate all the work you've done. I appreciate you putting in this proposal.
Likewise.
And coming on the show twice now, 2 shows.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And everybody else, go out and vote, and we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone.